On the 22nd of June 1941, the Third Reich's invasion of the Soviet Union began. The forces of Germany would wash like a black wave across Soviet territories, the panzer divisions of the Wehrmacht spearheading attacks through Russian lines, encircling and destroying Soviet defences even as they were being constructed, while Luftwaffe fighters and bombers darkened the skies. In anticipation of heavy losses repelling the forces of the Third Reich and in a desperate need of air power, on the 8th of October 1941, Stalin gave orders for the formation of the 221st Aviation Corps, an all-female Air Force unit consisting of the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. The women of the 588th, most of them barely in their 20s, would become one of the most famous bombing forces on the Eastern Front. To the Soviets, they would become heroes. To the Germans, a terrorizing force they themselves would call the Nachthexen, the Night Witches. To talk about the Night Witches, we really need to start at the beginning of female military aviation in the Soviet Union, with a young woman by the name of Marina Raskova. Born Marina Lubatovich on March 28, 1912, Marina's early life was relatively unremarkable. Her father was an opera singer and an opera singing instructor, her mother was also a teacher at a local middle school, and her own early life seemed set to follow the course into music laid out by her father. However, in 1919, at the young age of 7, her father would tragically die in a motorcycle accident. Marina would continue to study music and drama into her early teens under the encouragement of her mother, but at some point the pressures of this became too much and Marina switched to studying chemistry for the rest of her schooling years. After graduating high school, she would take up a position as a chemist at a local dye factory, where she would meet Sergei Raskov, and soon after they would marry, with Marina taking the last name of Raskovoi, and giving birth to her daughter Tanya in the following year. After a short period of time with a newborn child, Marina would return to the workforce, and it's at this point that her unremarkable life begins to take a turn for the remarkable. Taking up a role as a draftswoman at a newly constructed Air Force Academy at Monino near Moscow, it wouldn't take long before the bug of 1930s aviation would bite deep. Over the next 10 years, Marina would become famous, first training to become the first female navigator in the Soviet Air Force, and then a pilot by 1933. In 1934, she became the first female instructor in the Soviet Air Force as well. The new turn her life had taken, and the time away from home, did take a toll on her personal life, however. She divorced in 1935 after just 5.5 years of marriage. In 1938, Marina, along with Polina Osipenko and Valentina Grizadobova, would pilot the longest non-stop all-female flight ever at the time from Moscow to Komsomolsk in a Tupolev AN-T-37 long-range bomber named Rodina, or Motherland. A 26.5-hour flight covering more than 6,000 kilometers, crossing Siberia into the far east of Russia. Grizadobova was chosen as pilot, Osipenko the co-pilot, and Raskovoi to navigate, with their flight plan to symbolize the adventuresome spirit of the new Soviet nation. On the morning of September 24, 1938, the Rodina took off at 8:12 am from Shelkovo Airport near Moscow. Though they took off in a mist, the Rodina was soon flying above the clouds. The skies were at first clear as far as Kazan, but then the crew ran into stormy weather. To clear the storm, the crew was forced to take the aircraft to 5,000 meters, and from there the first leg of the journey was smooth. As night fell, however, the aircraft encountered more turbulence. Seeing ice beginning to form on the cockpit glass and the leading edge of the wings, the crew took the plane to 7,500 meters. The lack of moisture prevented further icing, however the air was so cold that the lubricating oil froze in the electric transformer. The crew lost radio transmission, leaving them only with the stars to navigate the night. The turbulence persisted through the night, even at this altitude, and the three women were using oxygen tanks in order to breathe. The AN-T-37's internal space was divided into 3 compartments, with each of the crew in a separate compartment. Communication between them was handled by handwritten notes sent through pneumatic tubes. When dawn broke, Marina had a brief chance to take her bearings and confirm the aircraft's location and course, but more poor weather and thick clouds lay ahead. At 7 am Moscow time on September 25th, they approached the sea to the north of Japan and turned inland. They'd been in the air for about 23 hours at this point, and they only had enough fuel to fly for 3 hours more. Soon after, Marina spotted the Amur River and took her final bearings of the flight. Visibility was almost down to zero, with mist covering most of the terrain below. Shortly after, a red light flared on the dash, signaling that fuel was running low and the plane began to lose altitude. Over a region that was forested and swampy with few safe landing places, it soon became clear that they would have to make an emergency landing. The crew had of course trained for this situation. However, as navigator, Marina's station was in the forward glass-covered nose of the aircraft, an extremely dangerous position due to the risk of an impact during an emergency landing. The pilot sent her a note through the communications tube asking, "Can you jump?" Marina replied no, but as the plane dipped lower, the pilot sent a second note ordering her to jump. As a military pilot now accustomed to obeying orders, Raskovoi quickly secured her maps, grabbed some chocolate she had on hand, looked out at the ground below her in search of a landing place, opened up the cockpit, and jumped when the plane was at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Grizadobovka, who had spotted a clearing in the swampy terrain, then secured the aircraft itself for a wheels-up landing. The plane was brought down so gently on the soft marsh surface that the body of the plane and all of its instruments remained intact. The time was 10:41 am on September 25th, and the crew had flown for 26 hours and 29 minutes, breaking the woman's long-distance record in international flying. Their ordeal, however, was not over yet. Marina's bailout had been quite successful, although her parachute had snagged on a fir tree just before landing, forcing her to cut herself free. She had taken very little with her when she jumped, only matches, a hunter's compass, a revolver, and the piece of chocolate. In the distance, she heard the Rodina's engines roar and then fall silent, followed soon after by the sound of a shot. Using her compass, she confirmed that the sound was from the southeast, but it wasn't close. With nothing but swampy terrain and heavy forest in that direction, she could be several days' travel away from the aircraft. Meanwhile, back at the Rodina with the plane on the ground, Grizadobova and Oskapenko's primary concern was for Raskovoi. First they fired several shots in the air with their own survival pistols to give her a bearing to the plane, and then they tried to establish radio contact for rescue. Unfortunately, the radio was still non-functional. Securing the aircraft for the night, they would soon have a visitor, a large black bear. Later in the night they awoke to the sound of a lynx scratching on the fuselage trying to get inside of the aircraft. Over the next several nights, a theme would develop of wild animals attempting to get inside of the aircraft after smelling food. Raskovoi, in the meantime, after taking the time for a short but exhausted sleep, began the track back to the plane. The cold wasn't an issue at this point. Her heavy flight suit kept her quite warm, however it made traversing the soft and swampy ground difficult. For food aside from the chocolate, she began to pick berries and mushrooms that she encountered. On the third morning, she was traversing a marsh covered in tall grass when it began to rain, and she suddenly sank up to her waist. After pulling herself free, she carefully worked her way out of the bog and then spent the rest of the day trying to dry her flight suit. Soaking wet, the cold was now going to be a problem. Back at the aircraft, the ladies had spent hours over the radio trying to repair it and establish contact with the outside world. However, a massive search had already been launched to locate them. Around 6,000 people and up to 50 aircraft took part in the rescue mission that covered land, air and sea. Local hunters familiar with the area volunteered to assist the search and rescue efforts. On the morning of October 3rd, the first recon aircraft located the Rodina. Spotting two small figures of the crew standing on the wing, the recon aircraft dropped all the supplies it carried and waved its wings to indicate that it had seen them and was going to report their location. Later that day, a team of Russian military paratroopers dropped onto the Rodina as well, carrying more food, medicines, and dry clothing. With the Rodina and its crew secured, all that remained was Marina. Over the next 2 days, the skies over the area filled with spotter planes and more paratroopers dropped in. 10 days after the bailout and emergency landing, Marina was located and escorted back to the downed aircraft. The Siberian wilderness, however, had left Raskovoi badly weakened, and she was carried out by a stretcher on an 8-hour track up the Amgan River before being transferred to Komsomolsk, where they embarked on a triumphant journey back to Moscow across Siberia by train. On October 27th, a reception was held at the Kremlin, attended by leaders of government and the military, where the young aviators would receive the Hero of the Soviet Union Award for the skill and bravery demonstrated in their flight. They were the first women to receive the award in its history prior to the start of the Second World War. Marina's actions in aviation along with this would grant her several strong ties and friendships in high-ranking political and military circles of the Soviet Union, including ties with none other than Joseph Stalin. Following the June invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany, Marina began petitioning actively for women to be allowed into combat roles in the Soviet militaries, and in particular, unsurprisingly, the Air Force. Now, it's important to note that there were actually no rules that prevented women from enlisting for combat duties at all. However, as a general rule, most female applicants would find themselves rejected, either by forced failings during the enrolment process, such as being deemed unfit to serve during a medical exam, or by tying up their applications in political red tape. The few that managed to get past this would find themselves in logistics or medical roles, piloting or navigating on a cargo plane, or driving a truck, for example. However, as the war rolled on and the death toll grew and German forces took more and more ground, slowly encroaching on Moscow, ever-increasing numbers of women were applying to defend their homes and country. On the 8th of September 1941, Marina held a speech in Moscow that is often considered the point at which things changed. It is known that at the time of this speech, Marina was already in contact and exchanging correspondence with a number of high-ranking Air Force officials and may have also been in contact with Stalin in regards to the establishment and training of an all-women's combat aviation regiment. Her speech, delivered almost completely to a female crowd, encouraged the women of the Soviet Union to rise up alongside their men in defense of the Union. The Soviet women. She is hundreds of thousands of drivers, tractor operators and pilots who are ready at any moment to sit down in a combat machine and plunge into battle. Dear sisters, the hour has come for harsh retribution. Stand in the ranks of the warriors for freedom. On October 8, 1941, exactly a month after her speech, Joseph Stalin would order the formation of the 221st Aviation Corps and its 3 regiments. The 586th would fly the fighters and escorts, the 587th would strike at the Germans by day, and the 588th would rule the night. Marina Raskova, with her stunning rise in Soviet aviation, her accomplishments and her drive, was one of, if not the most important driving force in the establishment of the 221st Aviation Corps and the Night Witches. Her actions inspired women to serve in a time of great need, while also proving that women were more than capable of standing in defense of their home and country. Marina would of course join and fly combat against the German forces under the 221st, but sadly, she would not see the end of the war. She died in a crash during an attempted emergency landing on the banks of the Volga River on the 4th of January 1943. She was just 30 years old. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching. Originally, I did plan this to be a single video, but the more I researched, the more I uncovered, and so this will now be a multi-parter. Remember to tune in next week and we'll continue the story of the formation of the 221st and the 588th, look at the training and the planes and the tactics, and of course, the first missions. A massive thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you, this new series wouldn't be possible, because, well, let's be perfectly honest, YouTube is probably going to demonetize it at some point. And I'd like to also remind every one of my Patreons that if you have any suggestions or requests for future topics, please message them to me on Patreon, or shoot me a message in the subscribers channel on my Discord. I always read the messages, and I always respond, even if it takes a little while. And to everyone that isn't a Patreon supporter, if you're interested in supporting this series, please click the link in the video description down below and consider a donation. Anyways, remember to check the video description down below also for links to my social media and to my Twitch channel, and remember to click that like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and you would like to see more. And until next time, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.